World of Warcraft takes place in a large open world which sets the scene for group content, questing, PvP, and for many players, exploration. While not being the main focus, Blizzard did still have this in mind when they released the game in 2004. Most areas are meant to be explored through normal gameplay, some are meant to be found by the more persistent players, and a few hidden locations aren't meant to be discovered at all. In this video, we will be taking a closer look at a place that was nowhere on the map, hardly mentioned by developers, and will result in a ban if players manage to get there. This is the story of the GM Island. When the game first released in 2004, there were a lot of gameplay bugs and issues. Thankfully, these were solved by Blizzard staff known as Game Masters or GMs. While not always being the case, Game Masters did sometimes have to log into the game in order to help players with their issues. The characters that they logged into had a unique set of blue equipment, which made them stand out on the occasions when they would have to enter the game world. While this is no longer the case, and hasn't been the case for a very long time, players used to be able to add Game Masters to their friend list, which would display their current zone if they logged in. This is when players first saw the zone name GM Island, a place that was originally added into the game in the alpha stages, which served as a hub for Game Master characters. The precise location of the island was later discovered by the player base, way off of the game map, but surprisingly not in a separate instance as one might expect. The island was located far northwest of Kalimdor, way past the point of fatigue, where you'd find nothing but water until you reached an invisible wall, which isn't unusual as this is the very end of the continent. However, if you did make it past this invisible wall and traveled a long distance outside the game map, you'd find yourself on a patch of water that no longer caused fatigue. After swimming for a while in this water, GM Island would finally come into view. The island was fairly typical and had a green tint to it, somewhat like Feralus. It had a house in the middle, which was the only building, and there was a cliff, some trees, as well as a graveyard. The house was nothing out of the ordinary, and it used a fairly common model which among others can be found in the command center located in the Stormwind City. What was out of the ordinary was a completely white room which could be found underneath the GM Island. The room was furnished only by a single chair, fittingly called the chair. In the very early versions of the game, the room had a unique interaction of removing the player from the game, not even being visible with the who list if they were inside the room. For this reason, as well as the general atmosphere of the room, players theorized that this was a place where GMs would interrogate players. As there is no actual record of this happening on a real Blizzard server, this is likely nothing more than a rumor. When players inevitably found their way into the island, they were sometimes met by a GM who teleported them into a faction city, usually Darnassus, followed by a ban of their account. As a lot of visitors of this place ended up receiving permanent bans, the GM Island got itself a reputation of being a place that even the most curious of explorers would think twice about attempting to get into. While this reputation is certainly deserved, the reality is that going to GM Island in itself was unlikely to give you more than a 3-hour ban, and in some severe cases up to a 72-hour ban. When I myself went to the GM Island during the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, I was teleported out and had a warning placed on my account, but I did not receive any ban. If I and many other explorers got warnings or short 3-hour bans, it begs the question of why there are so many visitors claiming that they got permanent bans for visiting the island. While going to the GM Island in itself was forbidden and did result in warnings or bans, the answer to why seemingly many players got permanent bans lies not in where they went, but how they went there. As you can see here, getting to the GM Island required exploits, or clever use of game mechanics as it's often called by exploiters, but some players decided to take it to another level when they started using actual hacks, third-party programs as well as altering game files, which obviously would lead to permanent account closure. There were other hidden developer areas, with a few of them being accessible by exploiting, but the GM Island is unique in that it's the only one that appears in the official lore of the game. As some players started hosting community gatherings on the GM Island, its accessibility became a bit of a problem, which is why Blizzard ended up removing the GM Island completely in patch 8.2 in the Battle for Azeroth expansion. Sadly, this removal was also made once Classic WoW released, and it is no longer possible to enter the island on official servers. Generally, most hidden areas that required some form of exploiting to get to have been fixed by now, but there are still a few locations that players may yet explore. I hope that you learned something new from this video and that you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.